The whiskey burned like liquid fire as it slid down Jedediah Nash's throat, warming his insides against the harsh Montana winter of 1878. He stood at the far end of the saloon, a solitary figure draped in shadow, his weathered hat pulled low over eyes that had seen too much death and too little mercy. Folks in Rustwater knew better than to approach Jed when he was drinking. The man shared nothing, not his table, not his stories, and certainly not his whiskey. The door to the Broken Spur saloon swung open, letting in a gust of frigid air and a woman no one had seen before. Katherine Grayson stepped inside, shaking snow from her cloak with a determination that silenced the usual rowdy crowd. She was no saloon girl, anyone could see that from her sensible traveling dress and the way she surveyed the room with clear, intelligent eyes. Jed didn't bother looking up. Another Eastern transplant, he figured, come to find adventure or escape scandal. They never lasted long in Rustwater. "I need a room," Katherine announced to the barkeep, her voice steady despite the obvious weariness in her shoulders, "and information about local land claims." The barkeep, a man called Hank with arms like tree trunks, snorted. "Ain't runnin' no hotel, madam, and land office closed 3 hours ago." "Then perhaps a drink while I wait for morning," she countered, placing coins on the countertop with a decisive clink. "Whiskey," she added, in a tone that suggested she wasn't asking for watered-down ladies' spirits. Hank shrugged and poured. Katherine took the glass and scanned the room for somewhere to sit. The saloon was crowded with miners and cowhands, many openly staring at the newcomer. She squared her shoulders and walked deliberately toward the one table with empty chairs, Jed's table. "Is this seat taken?" she asked, though she was already pulling out the chair. Jed finally looked up, annoyance flashing across his face. "Lady, there's 20 men in here who'd be delighted by your company. I ain't one of them." Katherine sat anyway. "I'm not looking for company, Mr. Nash," he grunted. "Jedediah Nash, Mr. Nash. I'm looking for a quiet corner where I won't be bothered." "You seem proficient at keeping people at a distance, so this seemed the logical choice." A hint of surprise crossed his features before they hardened again. "Suit yourself." They sat in silence, Katherine sipping her whiskey without flinching at its harshness. Jed watched her from under the brim of his hat, grudgingly impressed despite himself. After several minutes, he reached for the bottle between them to refill his glass. Before he could pour, Katherine's hand shot out and took the bottle, then his glass. "If we're sharing a table," she said calmly, "we might as well share the bottle." She poured whiskey into his glass, then slid it back to him before refilling her own. The saloon fell eerily quiet. Everyone knew Jed Nash's rule: nobody touched his whiskey. The last man who tried left with a broken nose. Jed stared at her, his jaw clenched tight. Then, to everyone's astonishment, including his own, he picked up the glass she'd filled and drank from it. "You got a death wish, miss?" His voice was quiet, dangerous. "Grayson. Katherine Grayson." "And no, Mr. Nash, merely practicality. One bottle between 2 people seems sensible." Jed studied her for a long moment. "You ain't from around here." "St. Louis, originally, though most recently from Denver." "What brings you to this god-forsaken corner of Montana territory?" Katherine took another sip before answering. "My brother's land claim. He died last month, influenza." Her voice remained steady, but Jed caught the flash of pain in her eyes. "I've come to see what he left behind. Your brother have a name, Thomas Grayson." Jed's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "Tom Grayson was your brother?" Katherine's eyes narrowed. "You knew him?" "Everyone knew Tom." Jed looked down at his whiskey. "Good man, fair, didn't deserve what happened to him." Katherine leaned forward. "What do you mean, what happened to him?" "I received word he died of influenza." Jed cursed under his breath. "That's so?" He finished his whiskey in one swallow. "Maybe you should talk to Sheriff Braddock in the morning." "I'd rather you tell me now, Mr. Nash." Their eyes locked in silent battle. Finally, Jed sighed. "Your brother didn't die of influenza, Miss Grayson. He was shot. Found him myself out by his claim." Catherine's face drained of color, but her composure remained intact. "Who killed him? Sheriff's got his theories. None that stuck. But you have your own thoughts on the matter." Jed's mouth tightened. "Randall Whitmore owns the big spread north of here, been buying up all the small claims he can. Your brother wouldn't sell." Catherine's knuckles whitened around her glass. "And the sheriff has done nothing. Whitmore's got money. Money talks in Rustwater." She nodded slowly, digesting this information. Then she looked up, her eyes clear and determined. "Thank you for your honesty, Mr. Nash." Jed shifted uncomfortably. "Don't thank me. I'm just telling you how things are. Where can I find my brother's claim?" "North Ridge, about 4 miles out of town. Nothing there for you but trouble, Miss Grayson. Nevertheless, it's mine now." She finished her whiskey and stood. "Is there somewhere in town I can stay?" Widow Halloran takes in boarders. 2 doors down from the general store." Katherine nodded. "Thank you again, Mr. Nash." She turned to leave. "Miss Grayson." His voice stopped her. "Tom's claim it's not just empty land. There's a cabin. Small but solid. He built it himself." Something flashed in her eyes, gratitude, perhaps, or determination. "Good night, Mr. Nash." Jed watched her leave, then poured himself another drink. He had a feeling Katherine Grayson was going to be trouble, the kind that followed you home and wouldn't leave until it got what it wanted. He was right. The next morning, Katherine found herself seated across from Sheriff Braddock, a thin, nervous man who seemed more interested in the papers on his desk than in answering her questions about her brother's murder. "Now, Miss Grayson, I understand you're upset, but we've looked into the matter thoroughly. Your brother was well liked, but frontier life is dangerous. Could have been drifters, could have been Indians. Could have been Randall Whitmore," Katherine suggested coolly. Braddock's face tightened. "That's a serious accusation against a respected businessman." "I wasn't aware I had made an accusation, Sheriff. I merely mentioned a name." The sheriff leaned back. "Mr. Whitmore made your brother a fair offer for that land. Tom refused. That's business, not motive for murder." "I'd like to see my brother's property." "It's a fair ride. Rough country. Maybe you should consider selling." "I know Mr. Whitmore's still interested. I'll need directions," Katherine interrupted, "and information on where I might purchase a horse." The sheriff sighed. "Livery's at the end of town. But a woman alone. Thank you for your concern, Sheriff." Katherine stood, effectively ending the conversation. "I'll be staying at Mrs. Halloran's boarding house. Should you suddenly recall any pertinent details about my brother's murder." Outside, Katherine took a deep breath of the cold morning air. She needed to get to Tom's claim, see what he had died protecting. But first, she needed a guide. At the livery, she found more than horses. Jedediah Nash was there, adjusting the saddle on a sturdy buckskin gelding. "Mr. Nash," she greeted him. "Good morning." He nodded curtly. "Miss Grayson, I find myself in need of a horse and directions to my brother's claim. And what did our esteemed sheriff have to say?" The sarcasm in his voice was unmistakable, that it was probably drifters or Indians. "And that I should sell to Mr. Whitmore," Jed snorted. "Course he did. I need to see the land for myself." Jed studied her for a long moment. "You riding out there alone, unless you're offering to accompany me, Mr. Nash," he frowned. "You always this direct, I find it saves time." A hint of something amusement perhaps crossed his face before disappearing. "I got business out that way anyhow." Katherine raised an eyebrow. "Do you?" "Now I do." He turned to the livery owner. "Joe, Miss Grayson here needs a horse, something steady." "You sure about this, Jed?" Joe asked, eyeing Katherine dubiously. "No." Jed replied honestly. "But I'm doing it anyway." An hour later, they rode out of town, Katherine on a gentle mare named Daisy, Jed leading the way on his buckskin. Katherine had changed into a split riding skirt that had raised Mrs. Halloran's eyebrows, but was eminently more practical than her traveling dress. "Have you been in Rustwater long, Mr. Nash?" Katherine asked as they left the town behind. "Long enough." "And what do you do when you're not escorting strange women to their murdered brother's properties?" Jed glanced at her. "I run cattle, small spread southeast of town." "You're a rancher, then?" "Some might call it that." His tone suggested the conversation was over, but Katherine persisted. "How did you know my brother?" Jed was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "We fought together. Army, 7th Cavalry. You were soldiers for a time, after the war, scouting mostly out on the plains, and after he went his way, I went mine. Ended up in the same place anyway." Jed looked over at her. "He spoke of you. Said his sister was the smartest person he ever knew. Said you were teaching school in St. Louis." "I was, until our parents died. Then I took a position in Denver, long way from Denver to Rustwater." "Yes," she agreed softly. "It is." They rode in silence after that, the mountains looming ahead, the path growing steeper. Finally, they crested a ridge and Jed reined his horse to a stop. "There," he said, pointing to a small valley below. A cabin stood near a creek, smoke rising from the chimney. "That's Tom's place." Katherine frowned. "There's someone there. Appears so." Jed's hand moved to the rifle in his saddle holster. "Is it Whitmore's men? One way to find out." He nudged his horse forward. As they approached the cabin, the door opened and an older man stepped out, shotgun in hand. "That's far enough," he called. Jed raised his hand. "Easy, Hank. It's Nash." The man squinted, then lowered his weapon. "Jed, what the devil are you doing here, bringing Tom's sister?" "Miss Grayson, this is Hank Wheeler. He worked Tom's claim with him." Katherine dismounted, approaching the weathered man. "You knew my brother?" Hank nodded, removing his hat. "Yes, madam. Fine man, your brother. Been looking after the place since. Well, you know." "Why didn't the sheriff mention you?" Katherine asked. Hank and Jed exchanged glances. "Sheriff and I don't exactly see eye to eye," Hank said carefully. "Hank was a witness," Jed explained. "He saw riders leaving Tom's place the night of the shooting." "Whitmore's men?" Katherine asked. "Couldn't say for certain," Hank hedged. "Was dark. But they came from the direction of Whitmore's ranch." Katherine looked between the two men. "Show me the claim, all of it. I want to understand what my brother died for." For the next few hours, Hank and Jed showed Katherine the property, 20 acres of good grazing land, the creek that ran year-round, and the small but promising mine shaft Tom had been working. Inside the cabin, she found Tom's journals, detailing his daily work and his hopes for the future. "He believed there was silver here," Hank explained. "Nothing spectacular, but enough to make a living." "And enough to interest Whitmore," Jed added grimly. Katherine ran her hand along the rough-hewn table her brother had made. "I'll need to stay here tonight. I want to read through his papers." Jed frowned. "That ain't wise. If Whitmore's men come back, I'll be here," Hank interrupted. "Been sleeping in the barn, happy to keep doing so." Katherine nodded gratefully. "Thank you, Mr. Wheeler." Jed looked like he wanted to argue, but instead said, "I'll bring supplies from town tomorrow, things you'll need." "You don't have to do that, Mr. Nash." "I know I don't." His gaze was steady. "I'll be back by noon." After Jed left, Katherine spent hours reading her brother's journals, learning about his life in Rustwater and his friendship with Jedediah Nash. Tom had trusted Jed, respected him. According to the journal, they'd saved each other's lives more than once during their Army days. The next day, true to his word, Jed returned with supplies, food, ammunition, tools, and to Katherine's surprise, books. "Found these at the general store," he said gruffly, handing her a package. "Figured you might want something to read beside Tom's scribblings." The small kindness touched her more deeply than she expected. "Thank you, Mr. Nash," he nodded, already turning away to help Hank repair the barn door. For the next week, Jed appeared daily, always bringing something useful, always finding work to do around the property. He rarely spoke unless spoken to, but Katherine found his silent presence reassuring. On the 7th day, Katherine announced her decision. "I'm staying," she told Jed as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "This land was important to Tom. I won't let Whitmore have it." Jed took a swig from his whiskey bottle he'd taken to bringing one whenever he visited. "It won't be easy. Whitmore won't just give up. I'm not asking him to." She reached over and took the bottle from his hand, then his glass. He watched, transfixed, as she poured herself a measure. "I'm telling him to." Jed's mouth quirked. "You always take a man's whiskey without asking, only when he's too slow to offer it." She handed him back his glass, their fingers brushing. The contact sent an unexpected warmth through both of them. Their eyes met, and for a moment, something unspoken passed between them. Then Jed looked away, clearing his throat. "You'll need help running this place. Mr. Wheeler has agreed to continue working the mine. And the rest. 20 acres is a lot for one woman." "I managed a school of 60 children in St. Louis, Mr. Nash. I believe I can manage a small homestead." He smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him. "I don't doubt that, Miss Grayson." The next morning, Katherine rode into town to file formal claim to her brother's property and to telegraph her resignation to the school in Denver. When she emerged from the land office, Randall Whitmore was waiting for her. He was a large man with expensive clothes and cold eyes. "Miss Grayson," he said, tipping his hat with exaggerated courtesy. "I understand you're taking over your brother's investment, Mr. Whitmore." Katherine kept her tone neutral. "Yes, I am. Perhaps we could discuss the matter over dinner. I have a proposition that might interest you." "I'm not selling, Mr. Whitmore." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "You haven't heard my offer. The price is irrelevant. The land is not for sale." Whitmore's expression hardened. "Miss Grayson, this territory can be dangerous for a woman alone. Accidents happen." "Are you threatening me, Mr. Whitmore?" "Merely expressing concern for your welfare." He stepped closer. "Your brother was stubborn too. Pity what happened to him." Katherine felt a presence behind her and knew without looking that Jed had appeared. "Everything all right here, Miss Grayson?" His voice was casual, but the tension in it was unmistakable. Whitmore's eyes flicked to Jed, then back to Katherine. "Nash, should have known you'd be involved." "Miss Grayson and I were just concluding our business," Katherine said smoothly. "Good day, Mr. Whitmore." As they walked away, Jed's hand hovered near the small of her back, not quite touching. "You all right?" "He as good as admitted to killing Tom," she said quietly. "Saying it and proving it are different things." Jed's jaw was tight. "You shouldn't have come to town alone." "I can take care of myself, Mr. Nash." "I don't doubt that, but Whitmore plays dirty." "Then I'll need to be prepared." Katherine stopped walking. "Will you teach me to shoot?" Jed stared at her. "You serious?" "Deadly." That afternoon, Jed set up targets behind the cabin bottles on a fence post. He showed Katherine how to load and hold his Colt revolver, explaining the mechanics of the weapon with patient detail. "Steady your breathing," he instructed, standing close behind her. "Aim with both eyes open." Katherine was acutely aware of his presence, the warmth of him, the smell of leather and horses, and something distinctly male. She squeezed the trigger and the bottle shattered. "Good." There was approval in his voice. Again. By sunset, she'd hit more targets than she'd missed, and Jed declared her a natural. They sat on the porch afterward, sharing his whiskey as had become their custom. "My father would be scandalized," Katherine mused, sipping from Jed's glass. His daughter drinking whiskey with a cowboy and shooting guns. You could still go back to Denver, Jed said quietly. Safer there. Katherine shook her head. I'm through with safe. Tom believed in this place. I want to understand why. And when you do understand. She looked out at the mountains, painted gold in the setting sun. I think I'm beginning to. That night, Whitmore's men came. 6 riders approaching the cabin under cover of darkness. But Jed had anticipated trouble and had stayed, keeping watch with Hank while Katherine slept. The first shot shattered the window. Jed pulled Katherine from her bed to the floor as bullets splintered the wood above them. Stay down, he ordered, returning fire through the broken window. Outside, Hank's shotgun boomed twice. A man screamed and horses whinnied in panic. Can you shoot? Jed asked, handing Katherine the loaded revolver. She nodded, her face pale but determined. Anyone comes through that door who isn't me or Hank, you shoot. Understand? She nodded again. And Jed slipped out the back door. The night erupted into chaos, gunfire, shouting, the thunder of hooves. Katherine crouched by the door, the revolver steady in her hands, heart pounding. Minutes stretched like hours. Finally, silence fell. Katherine strained to hear anything beyond her own breathing. Miss Grayson, Jed's voice from outside. It's over. She opened the door to find Jed supporting Hank, who was bleeding from a graze on his arm. Beyond them, 2 men lay motionless in the dirt. The others had fled. Are you hurt? Katherine asked, helping them inside. Just a scratch, Hank insisted, though he winced as Katherine cleaned and bandaged the wound. They'll be back, Jed said grimly, with more men. Then we'll be ready, Katherine replied, her voice steadier than she felt. Jed looked at her for a long moment. This isn't your fight. They killed my brother. That makes it my fight. Over the next days, they prepared for Whitmore's retaliation. Jed brought men he trusted, 3 cowboys from his own small ranch, veterans like himself. They fortified the cabin, set watches, and waited, but Whitmore didn't send men. Instead, the sheriff arrived with eviction papers. Claims the land was sold to him before Tom's death, Sheriff Braddock explained, not quite meeting Katherine's eyes. Has paperwork and everything. Forgeries, Katherine said flatly. My brother would never have sold. That's for a judge to decide. Until then, you're trespassing. When is the hearing? Jed demanded. 2 weeks from now in Helena. After the sheriff left, Katherine paced the cabin. He's trying to force me off the land before the hearing. Likely, Jed agreed. Once you're gone, he'll make sure you can't get back. Then I won't leave. Katherine stopped pacing. I need proof the documents are forged, something in Tom's handwriting from the day they claim he signed the deed. Jed thought for a moment. Tom kept records at the bank too. Accounts, contracts. Could you get them? Bank manager owes me a favor. The next day, Katherine and Jed rode into town. While Katherine created a diversion at the general store, loudly discussing her plans to leave Rustwater, Jed slipped into the bank to examine Tom's papers. That evening, as they rode back to the cabin, Jed was grim. The signatures don't match, and Tom wasn't even in town the day they claim he signed. He was with me, tracking strays from my herd. You testify to that, in front of the governor himself if necessary. Katherine reached over and squeezed his hand. Thank you, Jedediah. It was the first time she'd used his full name, and something in the way she said it made his chest tighten. That night, sitting by the fire, they shared the whiskey bottle as usual. But something had changed between them, attention and awareness. Why did you help me? Katherine asked suddenly. That first day in the saloon, you could have sent me away. Jed was quiet for a long time. Tom saved my life once, Cheyenne ambush. I was pinned down out of ammunition. He came back for me when he could have saved himself. And you felt you owed him. At first, maybe. Jed looked at her, his eyes reflecting the firelight. Not anymore. What changed, you did. The words were simple, but his voice was rough with emotion. Katherine moved closer, taking the glass from his hand. I think, Mr. Nash, that I would like to kiss you. I think, Miss Grayson, that I would like that too. Their first kiss was tentative, a gentle exploration. The second was not. Months of tension dissolved into passion that left them both breathless. I never expected you, Jed murmured against her hair. Nor I you, Katherine replied, her fingers tracing the scar on his jawline. But here we are. Morning brought reality crashing back. 2 of Whitmore's men were spotted watching the cabin from the ridge. That afternoon, a messenger arrived with a note. Last chance. Leave now or face the consequences. Katherine crumpled the note. We need more than just proof of forged documents. We need proof Whitmore killed Tom. Been thinking on that, Hank said slowly. One of Whitmore's men, fellow called Jenkins, has been drinking heavy lately, talking too much. Can you get him talking more? Jed asked. Hank's smile wasn't pleasant. Reckon I could. That night Hank went to town while Jed stayed with Katherine. The cabin seemed smaller somehow, charged with the awareness of what had passed between them. If this works, Katherine said as they sat by the fire, if we prove Whitmore's guilt, what then? Justice, I hope. And after that, she looked at him directly. What do you want, Jedediah? He was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. Then, peace, a home, things I never thought I deserved. His eyes met hers. What do you want, Katherine? The same. She took his hand. Perhaps we could want those things together. His fingers tightened around hers. I'd like that. Hank returned near dawn with news. Jenkins had bragged, even about being there when Whitmore ordered Tom killed. He'd kept a watch Tom was wearing, taken as a trophy. He's passed out drunk at the saloon now, Hank reported. Watch is in his vest pocket. We need that watch, Katherine said. And Jenkins's testimony. Tall order, Jed frowned. Jenkins will sober up and remember he shouldn't have talked. Then we need to act now. Katherine stood. I have a plan. 2 hours later, Jenkins woke to find himself tied to a chair in Tom Grayson's cabin, facing Tom's very angry sister and an even angrier Jedediah Nash. On the table before him lay his confession, written out in detail. Sign it, Katherine said, placing a pen in his shaking hand. Sign it and testify against Whitmore and you'll live to see another sunrise. He'll kill me, Jenkins protested. He might, Jed agreed, if he gets the chance. But right now, I'm the one you should be worried about. Jenkins signed. With the confession and Tom's watch in hand, inscribed with his initials, and clearly identifiable, Katherine and Jed rode to the U.S. Marshal's office in the next county. Whitmore's influence didn't extend that far, and Marshal James Davis had a reputation for incorruptibility. After reviewing their evidence, Davis agreed to investigate. 2 days later, he arrived in Rustwater with 4 deputies and arrest warrants for Randall Whitmore and Sheriff Braddock. The town watched in stunned silence as both men were led away in handcuffs, charged with murder and conspiracy. Jenkins's testimony, combined with the physical evidence, and Jed's sworn statement about Tom's whereabouts on the day of the alleged sale, was damning. A week later, the judge ruled in Katherine's favor, confirming her rightful ownership of Tom's claim. The town of Rustwater, long under Whitmore's shadow, seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief. That evening, Katherine and Jed sat on the porch of the cabin that was now undisputedly hers, watching the sunset and sharing a bottle of whiskey. What will you do now? Jed asked, his arm around her shoulders. Stay, build something here, honor Tom's memory. She looked up at him. What will you do? I was thinking of expanding my herd. 20 acres of good grazing land would help with that. Katherine smiled. Are you proposing a business arrangement, Mr. Nash? Not exactly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden box. Inside was a simple gold ring. "I'm proposing something more permanent." Catherine's breath caught. "Jedediah, I love you, Katherine Grayson. Never thought I'd say those words to anyone, but there they are. I love you, and I want to spend my life with you if you'll have me." Katherine took the glass from his hand and set it aside, then took his face between her palms. "A woman who takes a cowboy's whiskey should be prepared to take the rest of him too," she said softly. "Yes, Jedediah Nash. Yes, I will marry you." Their wedding was held the following spring, when wildflowers covered the hills around Rustwater. The entire town attended, along with U.S. Marshal Davis, who brought news that Whitmore and Braddock had been sentenced to hang for Tom's murder. Jed and Katherine combined their properties, building a new, larger cabin where the old one had stood. Hank stayed on, managing the mine, which eventually produced enough silver to make them comfortable, if not wealthy. Katherine started a school in Rustwater, teaching the children of miners and ranchers with the same passion she'd once brought to her St. Louis classroom. And every evening, they sat together on their porch, sharing a bottle of whiskey and the quiet contentment of two people who had found in each other something they hadn't known they were seeking. 5 years later, they would sit on that same porch, watching their twin daughters play in the yard that Tom had once envisioned filled with cattle. The girls, Mary and Thomasina, named for Katherine's mother and brother, had Jed's dark hair and Katherine's determined spirit. "Did you ever think," Katherine asked, pouring whiskey into Jed's glass before filling her own, "that your life would turn out like this?" Jed smiled, watching his daughters chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. "Never, but I wouldn't change a moment of it." Katherine rested her head on his shoulder, content in the knowledge that sometimes the greatest journeys begin with the smallest gestures, like a woman taking a glass from a cowboy's hand.